to keep some key quotes from these 3 days. And of course, I think the number one is from Beafit, isn't it? What did Beafit say? Huh? Funny is not a problem, it's a solution. I thought that was a classic. I've never heard that before. And then I thought the other one, which was wonderful, is why are the resources not in the classroom when you go to the resource center? And the person says, because this is the resource center. If I'm inspected and the resources aren't here, I'm going to be in trouble. So I thought that was also a classic. Maybe you can also think of some more, and we'll gather them together at the end. So one thing I did want to talk about last night, I'm just going to take 2 minutes just to talk about it now, because some people have come up to me individually, is as you know, I'm the head of training here at IIEP, and we do a lot of training courses. And interestingly, I thought I was so impressed by, where's Wesley? Wesley, where are you hiding? I was so impressed by Wesley, and then how effectively he talks and so on. And then somebody said that he was previously one of our graduates. So I understand now, Wesley, why you're so empowered. Anyway, but if some of you may be interested in our courses, so I'm very happy to talk to you about the courses we offer. I'll be here at 12:15 when we break for lunch. But essentially, we offer a course in education sector planning, which is a 6-month course, which gives you all the key competencies you need to be education sector analysis, education planning. And then we offer a longer one, which is called the Advanced Training Program, which goes on for 9 months, which is master's equivalent, where you also do specialized courses. One of the specialized courses will come up in future will be planning for inclusive education. Another one, which my friend from South Africa will be very pleased about, will be planning for early childhood development. And we have to connect the two, and also lifelong learning. So we got some interesting courses. So if you want to talk about the courses, and there's a brochure in the back of your pack, there's a brochure showing what courses we offer here. We get a lot of people, mainly ministry people, but a lot of people from UNICEF recently, and also some of the other donor agencies come and do our courses. So you'll be welcome. So what we're doing today is we're going to, don't worry, I've not forgotten Jennifer. She knows I forget a lot of things. I'm getting a bit old, but I haven't forgotten that one. But the first thing we'll do is we're going to have an interjection by Florence to talk a little bit more about the forum next year. And then Philippe is going to remind us of what we were doing yesterday, the salient points that came out. And then we've got Hannah Alasutari from the World Bank, who's going to give the introduction to quality. And then we're going to go into a panel where we will actually remain together today. We won't split into 2 different rooms, we'll remain together. And then we'll have some group work on service delivery. This is one of the most elusive areas, quality. You know, how do you define quality in education? It's quite a tricky one, but it's so important. And then in the afternoon, we'll, Mark, where's Mark? Mark Waltham? Oh, he's probably working on his big ideas now, because he's going to be talking about big ideas. And then we're going to be looking at country. I think we're going to call it country follow-ups rather than country action plans, because it's a bit difficult for you to do action plans on behalf of your country, but what you're going to follow up on. And then reflections on the round table and the next steps, what we're going to do going forward. Okay, great. So Florence, pleasure to invite you to talk about the forum, because it's a very, very important forum following up from Salamanca coming up next year.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I couldn't attend your meeting yesterday, but I heard the first day and I was very impressed by all the examples of policies and programs that you share with us, and I think it's completely linked with what we are planning to do next year. As you heard on Wednesday, when our ADG education, made a speech, she announced that we are planning to organize an international forum in 2019, June 2019, The place is still to be confirmed. To mark the 25th anniversary of the Salamanca Declaration and the World Conference on Special Needs and Inclusive Education that took place in Spain with the cooperation with UNESCO. It's UNESCO's World Conference. The idea of this forum, first of all, is to really foster policy and technical dialogue around inclusive education and the new paradigm around the issue of inclusion. You've heard about some figures around the world that show that not only many children still do not have access to education, but also they do not learn once they are in education. So there is a real issue in terms of access and of quality, and we do not divide the two. They go hand to hand. We cannot have inclusion and access if we do not have quality, and we don't have quality education if we don't have access and inclusion. So the idea is really to gather representatives from countries around the world to discuss this issue of inclusion in the framework of SDG 4, and also to identify the critical challenges, the main gaps, and to see the progress since Salamanca. And if possible, we also want to have a kind of new statement around inclusion in education or an inclusive education, a new statement that will be, launched and shared globally. So from what I heard from your country, so yeah, just one word to say that our approach is broader than disabilities. We approach the issue of inclusion in a broader sense, how really to address all the barriers that impede children and young people being in school and effectively learned. Regardless the age, the gender, the socioeconomic background, the ethnic background, the abilities or disabilities, etc. So we are at the beginning of this process. So I think today is very timely. We have three main guiding principles. First of all, we want to be inclusive and participatory in our planning process, and also during the forum. Second, we want to not to start from scratch, but we really want to build on what has been done prior to this forum. There are many big conferences and big events that are taking place now or a few months ago, and we really want to build on what has been done. For instance, the DEFIT Summit, even if the summit will focus only on disability, we really want to take the recommendation from this summit to feed and to inform our forum. The same for this roundtable today. So I hope to be able also to present the recommendation of this roundtable during the forum next year. Maybe Jim or Jennifer, I'm sure they will join us so they can present the outcomes of your roundtable. So this is very important. Participatory, inclusive, to build on what already exists, and to be, I would say, quite innovative. I don't want to have another meeting, another conference, because I can tell you that for the past 20 years that I was at UNESCO, I'm fed up with all this conference, with this nice word, but nothing happened. So we will try to find innovative ways. For instance, we want to do much more prior to the forum. It means to involve as many as possible as partners, also young organizations. We really want to work with youth organizations for them to be prepared for not just to come the day of the event to present on the panel, but really to do some concrete work prior to the forum. For instance, young youth organization, they can, launch some in the social media, social network to launch discussion around the issue of inclusion and equity in their communities, in their cities. Also to engage cities, that cities are key when it comes to inclusion, going beyond education, but how to have inclusive cities also. We want to engage partners, for instance, UNICEF, GP, the World Bank, if they have ongoing meetings, conferences, programs, just to come up with some key recommendations that, again, could fit into our forum. So really to build something, not starting at the forum date, but starting from now. And also to have more activities after the forum. And we really want to engage with partners so we can have concrete follow-up activities in the countries. So Ministry of Education will be invited, representative from Ministry of Social Affairs, Health. We really want to focus to strengthen the issue of cross-sectoral partnership. to have also community, civil society organizations, DPOs representatives, etc. So it will be really, as we say, an inclusive forum in the essence of the forum. So thank you very much, Philippe, and I'm at your disposal if you have any questions. And really, I'm sure that most of your countries will be contacted and will be engaged if you are interested to join our initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you had a good rest. So, as yesterday morning, I'm going to do the recap from yesterday's discussion. So, we'd like to again thank the three rapporteurs who actually took notes and which I'm going to translate now. So, we had 4 panel sessions yesterday, 2 about the supply side and 2 about the demand side. So I will start with the first one on supply side, which involved Kenya and Ghana. And so main discussion points were the following. The discussion on inclusive education in Kenya started in the years 2000 through the efforts of civil society organizations. And there has been a great progress in ensuring that the government leads the movement of inclusive education with support from the civil society. However, teachers in special schools receive monetary incentives for teaching children with disabilities because it is believed that they do more work than in mainstream schools and than mainstream teachers. So this hampers a move towards inclusive education because those mainstream teachers with inclusive education training choose to go to special schools to teach due to the monetary financial incentives. So in addition to that, there was a kind of reversed integration in Kenya in the 90s, where a special school for the blind children started receiving sighted children to learn together with blind children. And this led to the question, what should we do with special schools in the move towards inclusive education? Should we develop them as resource center? So that's maybe a question for further research. The society still grapples, in Kenya, the society still grapples with understanding on what inclusive education really means. And I think this is not only in Kenya. What people usually see is integration. And there is a lot of resistance in pushing inclusive education because people think it's not possible to do it. In Ghana, the first special school was established in the mid-90s. This brings a discussion on how the time frame and history shapes how people perceive inclusive education. For instance, in Kenya, special schools started to be built as early as in the 40s. So there is an assumption that it will take a lot of time for people in the country to unlearn segregation. So what about Ghana? The response from the Ghana delegation was it's not really about the time frame or history which shapes the perception of the society, but more on how the society establishes strategies in pushing for the inclusive education agenda. The teacher education program in Ghana emphasized universal design for learning. Instead of teaching teachers on specific strategies for specific disabilities, such as autism, for example, teachers are taught how to differentiate the curriculum or the classroom to respond to individual needs of children with and without disabilities. This is real inclusion. The inclusive education policy of Ghana focuses on all children and not only on those with disabilities. So other forms of vulnerabilities and exclusions are covered. The move towards inclusive education in Ghana was triggered through the establishment of pilot schools spearheaded by UNESCO. However, it was noted that sustainability and scalability have been an issue with the piloting process. For instance, piloting is perceived as something that has a beginning and an end. This contradicts the whole idea of inclusive education, which is a never-ending process, not an end in itself. So probably another subject of research. Inclusive education. So the main conclusions of this group, Ghana and Kenya, education actually should start even before formal education. There is a need to focus on mainstreaming disability and inclusion in the ECD agenda, and this is not done enough. Providing monetary incentive to special teachers should be critically reviewed, as the mechanism may not support the move to inclusive education. Inclusive education should be understood thoroughly. It has been a misconstructed concept. There is a need to develop effective communication strategy for it so that it is understood by the society. There is a need to check the terminology on piloting. Instead of treating the process as something that has a beginning and an end, it should be treated as a continuous process that needs strengthening, refining, etc. Finally, we need to explore what transforming special schools into resource centers implies. Ghana admitted they have heard about the strategy, but they have not really understand what this means in other countries. The next panel on the supply side was with Vietnam and Nepal, which both recognize that the strong reflection on inclusiveness in their respective constitutions and policy frameworks provided a point of departure for the introduction of inclusive education to be integrated in their education sector plan. Both Nepal and Vietnam highlighted the best practices and focus on inclusive education in pre-service and in-service training of teachers. In this regard, the inclusive education component has been integrated in the regular teacher professional development modules in Nepal. Both countries also shared that in addition to teachers being trained, there are resource centers and outreach teachers trained. Both countries highlighted that despite the professional development provisions context, large classes, remote and scattered communities pose a challenge for teachers to mainstream inclusive education techniques in their classroom. Vietnam also shared that they have a bachelor and master program on inclusive education in place, and they are actually launching a PhD on inclusive education next October. Nepal has collaboration with development partners organizations and universities that led to the adaptation of a number of national frameworks and guidelines. So both countries recognize they have a large variety of adapted teaching learning materials in place that includes ICT-based adapted materials for visually and audible impaired students. However, adapted materials for intellectual disabilities are often very, very limited. So for both these two countries, Nepal and Vietnam, the conclusions are is that both countries have taken a clear departure in terms of integration of inclusive education within their education sector programming and planning. Achievements in terms of teacher training and development are significant. Translating training provisions into practice in the classroom is an area that has been recognized as needing further work to ensure nationwide rollout of inclusive education. And finally, within the provision in teacher professional development, learning materials, infrastructure, there is an emphasis on certain areas of disability, with cognitive and intellectual disabilities being notably far less represented. So moving now to the two other panels on the demand side, attitudes, costs, risks, and rewards. The first panel was with Fiji and Nepal. Fiji shared that attitudes should be addressed simultaneously at the personal, family, school, and community policy decision-making levels. And Nepal shared that in terms of ensuring inclusion, reservations, quotas are in place in civil service and teacher position, and that sector-wide approach adopted provided a broad participation in terms of stakeholders involved in sector program review and consultation. Both countries undertook mass campaign to increase enrollment and have specific references to enrollment of children with disabilities. In the case of Nepal, the integrated EMIS also is used to inform the mapping and targeted enrollment of out-of-school children, taking drivers of disparity into account. Fiji shared that their advanced FEMIS allowed them to provide targeted support to children with disabilities, including financial support and meeting indirect and hidden costs, such as waiving school fees. Nepal explained their comprehensive scholarship system that includes both residential and non-residential support to ensure access and participation for children with disabilities, are also considering the complex geography and remoteness of some of the communities that they live in. Both countries have costed inclusive education within their education sector plan program, for which Fiji has an individual assessment model to allow tailored support. The main conclusions of this group of two countries were that attitudes constitute the #1 constraints or enabler for the mainstreaming and inclusion of children with disabilities in education. They are the most complex issues to address in the framework, but good practices, both within the two countries and at the international level, have provided a roadmap on how to do this. The most important strategy when addressing attitude is to make sure that people with disabilities are included in all aspects of education policy, planning, programming, implementation, budgeting, monitoring, etc. Realistic costing allows for targeted support, for which a strong MIS is one of the key prerequisites. So the last panel session with Ethiopia and South Africa on the main side raised the issue that attitudes may be negatively influenced by cost and time associated with inclusive education. Parents need to be supported and included. Parents need not to be blamed, but also we need to understand the cultural norms and the context that may hamper and influence parents' ability to support their children with disabilities. Inclusion is often an afterthought in policies. Then separate inclusion policy need to be taken into consideration and inserted into existing policies, which results in additional costs, lack of commitment, and poor resources vis-à-vis when they are included from the start. We need to find a common understanding and language for the use of words about disability and inclusion. Gender and cultural matters have been considered, but not enough in the inclusion agenda. And final observation from this group are that media and the use of images that are inclusive can support a more positive and inclusive attitude. Big people make big news, so the use of role model and high-profile people to promote inclusion needs to be considered. We need to start inclusion at the early stage, early childhood development. Central to all policy development should be the inclusion from the start, and it should not be separate. And finally, we need to recognize inclusion or non-inclusion as a system issue, and we need to address this as from the household to the macro level. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think it's very important we do these recaps, and then what we will do after the meeting is we'll put a report together, which is not just like full of detail, but looking at the key strategic things that came out of the meeting. And that's why Philippe is doing this every day. So now I'd like to welcome our colleague from the World Bank, Hannah Alasutari, to give the next presentation. But I also just want to welcome also a colleague from my own unit here, Miyoko Saito. Miyoko, if we can just show. One of the problems of having to work in a very small room like this is I've not been able to actually bring many of my colleagues in. Now, Miyoko is an expert in assessment, and Miyoko is one of the reasons why SACMEC actually was able to develop in Southern Africa. I met her when I was working in the Ministry of Education in 1997 when she did the first SACMEC survey in Kenya. So it's been a really important contribution. So we wanted Miyoko to come into this session and find out what are the implications of inclusive education for assessment. But if you'd like to start, that'd be great.
Or would you like me to click? Yeah, it's okay. I use this one.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. So my name is Hanna Nallasutari. I've spoken with most of you during this week. I work at the World Bank. Before World Bank, I was a teacher, also an academic. I worked as a teacher trainer, researcher, doing some postdoctoral research. Also, I've worked in different parts of the world as advisor in bilateral programs and also hired by local education authority. I worked in Africa, Middle East, and Eastern Europe. But in the World Bank for the past 1.5 years, and I think that's the perspective I have in this brief introduction. I'm very happy to be able to open the quality part of the service delivery. I think as some of the other presenters also mentioned, we can always, have different opinions of how to categorize, different boxes. And I also mentioned it earlier that I think perhaps part of the curriculum, student assessment and learning support, teachers are very crucial part of that, and also the learning materials. So even though I'm talking about that part, I'm going to also reflect on those other areas. And I wanted to put the title Ensuring Quality Inclusion in Learning as part of this brief introduction, because I think it's really going to that, what is it that we need to do? What is it that we need to do in the classroom level to make sure that once the children are included, they also learn? How do we address the learning crisis that is very much there? I'm sorry, I was going to use my computer when I was supposed to use this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so also just a brief statement in the beginning there that ensuring quality inclusion in learning is really a process that was also mentioned here earlier, that it's not something that has a beginning and the end, but it's really an ongoing process. And it really needs to aim at the access, which was also emphasized in the morning here, and also for that opportunity for participation and achievement for all students. So it's not enough to have the social experience of it. And I think, of course, what was talked about yesterday, how important it is to have the ongoing work for the attitudes and community sensitization. At the same time, we really need to see that what do we do for the students who come to the school so that they really learn and are able to go for the full potential. So here is some of the content that is also part of the one-pagers that we were shared. So it emphasizes that there should be a guarantee for a rights-based access to curriculum, and also describing what the inclusive curriculum really should be all about. It should really have that opportunity to acquire core academic skills and basic cognitive skills, and also the life skills for everyone. And then it should really uphold this principle of being non-discrimination, diversity, and tolerance. And how is that also visible in the curriculum contents? How the teaching and learning materials are going to take that into account. And then it also should be adaptable towards greater inclusiveness, and teachers should receive training on that adaptation. Again, the mention of the teachers. And it's really important to remember that inclusion should not be a placement, but it should really be about supporting every child to grow through school, to become full members of society. So it's important to give that, have that big picture in mind. So I have a question to all of the countries represented in here. What is the curriculum that you have? What is it about? What is the learning materials that you use? Are there textbooks? Are there other resources? And then when you know what really is about the curriculum and who are the people responsible for that, it's important to look at these key principles. And I like the figures of the one-pagers, and I used them in this brief summary here. It's important to look that the curriculum really aims at equity and adaptability. It's important that it's flexible and also relevant. And you actually have all these within your folders. So, and of course, you will also get the presentation. So I think this is a good checklist really to look at and work with those responsible for curriculum development, that there is really an understanding of this, what it means. I'm going to move forward without knowing exactly how much time I have. I'm about 5 minutes, so I'm doing okay. So I'm going to move for the assessment. Assessment goes along and needs to be really developed with the curriculum. So whatever the curriculum includes, of course, the assessment needs to look at. However, I want to emphasize also within inclusive education, it is really important to think about assessment for learning, so that we only don't have the exams, but we actually have formative assessment, and we really make sure that there is that monitoring and follow-up, that what does the child really learn. There are 4 different areas within assessment adaptation that it's important to take into account. How is it presented? Is it in large prints? What about sign language and Braille? Are those available when needed? Also, for responding, are there some students who might need some additional equipment, a computer or something else in order to respond? What about the setting? Does the child need a smaller room or a quiet place? And also for the timing. So maybe for these 3 different areas, one could say that positive discrimination should be allowed. So if there is more time needed, that should be given. If a student needs some breaks in between the assessment, those should be allowed. So maybe it's really thinking a little bit out of the box and not to have that mind shift of thinking there's something wrong with this child because the child cannot sit for that period of time. It's rather looking at what can the school do? What can the curriculum and assessment part be really doing in order to accommodate all those different needs? Also, we had good material about the screening, and this is maybe another question for the countries to hopefully tackle today in the panels. Do you have some screenings in place? How do they function? What are those issues that need to be looked at, and what is really going on well? In an ideal scenario, it probably would be best to be able to look at that mother who is pregnant right away and follow up and have the health system really providing the information for the education, for the preschool and then further levels. It doesn't always happen like that. If there is a screening opportunity, at least before the school begins, at least there is some information that you can give for the teacher. So they're better off. And of course, the earlier you can identify, the earlier you can assess, and then if there is a possibility for early intervention, the better. So that cannot be emphasized enough. There are some areas here that are important to consider when thinking of organizing the screening. It should be low cost. There should be that high specificity. The word I always have difficulties in pronouncing, but I'm sure you got it. It should be also sensitive. It's important to really think, what is the terminology that is used? What does the screening do? Is it going to actually increase, discrimination? Have you got those kind of languages used that is not going to be really understood the way it should be? It also should be easy to use for teachers and community members, but it should also be connected to the referral system. There shouldn't be screening just for nothing. There should be a follow-up for that. Parent involvement is important. The parents really have the most information from the first days of the child and the childhood. And it also should be accessible for children in and out of school. And ministry collaboration is very important in this. Learning support, very briefly here, in order to make sure that the child really is able to learn and the information about the child is in the school, it's important to have the documentation. So IEP is certainly a document that is used in very many contexts of the world. How it's used, it's also an issue that maybe we can hear later on in the panels. It's important that it is really a document that is used by the teachers and other professionals and the parents. It shouldn't be on the wall of the classroom. I have seen some schools like that, and we did have a discussion about it. It is a confidential information. Of course, every context treats those documentations in a different way, but I think it's one of these sensitivities that's important to take into account. It's important that it also includes the strengths of the child. Of course, the disability and challenges need to be there, but really building on those strengths. Every one of us have the strengths. Every student has those strengths, and those are the really, that's the way to to build on, then looking at what is the support that is needed. It's important to really look at different local context, how, what type of individual support is available. Who are those professionals you have? Sometimes it's about the eyeglasses only. Sometimes it's about something else. So it's important to have that information, that what's available and what is it that you can do for the most rural areas as well as those urban ones. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hannah. So it's our pleasure now to invite the panel to come to the front. So we have Cambodia and South Africa, and Natasha is going to be the moderator. Yeah. So you're taking over, Natasha.
So this is our last panel for the roundtable. I apologize for my voice. I think I sound like a teenage boy, but if it goes completely, I will. I've already asked Jennifer to step in. The microphone is not broken. And thank you, Hannah, for making a presentation. So we've covered the last block in the framework, which is quality curriculum, student assessment, and learning support. A lot of countries, when we were setting up this roundtable, started to discuss the screening. Screening cannot be done alone, as Hannah mentioned. You have to make sure that screening is connected to provision of referral to services and provision of assistive devices. So we thought that Cambodia would have something to share about that, because I know you have and you've had a screening program of experience with that. And then, of course, not to forget about the curriculum and adaptation of curriculum, and then provision of learning support. So I will start again, just like all the other panels, with a lead-in question or a trigger question to start the conversation. So what was your experience, and that's a question to Cambodia, in setting up your disability screening program? And was it school-based or health center-based? And then who were involved, which departments, units, or schools? If you could please spend a couple of minutes talking about that. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Subhya. I'm from Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, Cambodia. So I'm pleased to share my experience on screening for disability in Cambodia. And actually, so far we depends mainly on NGOs and DPO in screening, because our department just newly established in 2016, so it's very new. Before this, we just have a special education office, so the scope is small, only the focus on primary education level. But now we extend to from pre to higher education level. So right now it's big scope. So regarding to the screening, we have especially collaboration with some NGO, like the Krusha Thmai, last time, Krusha Thmai has 5 special schools, right now transferred to Ministry of Education. That's we call Special Education High School right now. So in working with each other, we have some basic guidelines and as well as the tool in order to do screening regarding to specific disabilities. And now I would like to share experience with the site screening. Yeah, that we have some project like SHIP. Yeah, SHIP means School Health Integrated Program. We have Fred Hello. We also have a Site Saver organization. Yeah, and funded by World Bank, by GPE, yeah, and UNICEF. So for SHIP, we piloted the program in one province, in Siem Reap province, and it involved for 4 districts, and the number of children, to be screened was about 10,000, 10,000 children, and from from grade 1 to grade 6, So we mainly focus on in-school children only, and this program reveals the results that they can identify the sight impairment, seeing impairment, and they refer to the professional and local health centers nearby, and they also supported with hearing aids, seeing aids like wearing glasses or wearing lens or spectacles and so on. So this program is just a pilot program, but the result is good because it gives the accurate screening data. So we hope in the future we will extend to some other provinces in Cambodia. And another one is not the real screening mechanism, but it is about the cognitive testing of inclusive education. They conducted with UNICEF in terms of Washington working group. So we pilot in Siem Reap province as well in 2017. So even that piloting had a small scale, but we have involved both parents with children with and without disabilities, out and in school, outside school and inside school children, to be involved. So the total number of the participants was 69, 69, and we have made conclusion and recommendation regarding to this piloting, and they show that the perception or the attitude towards the inclusive education between the outside and inside school, also parents with children with and without disability was quite similar in terms of access to education, access to school, and many more. I don't have time to just specify, but it also focuses on the school environment, to the challenges, to the barriers to access to school as well. Yeah. So if I have time, I will show the brief report. But this report is internal use because the small scope, small sample, so we cannot generalize, but it is we can say the milestone or the guide for us in the future as well. I think, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else from Cambodia?
Yeah, about screening, I know that CRUSATME, we are an NGO in Cambodia, and we work on blind education and deaf education. And for the eye screening, we support the Ministry of Education for this, and now it's in place. But today we are working on ear screening, and we developed a new it's a base project with private sector, Ministry of Education, and through the Department of the Health Department of the Ministry of Education. And we try to use a new, to be innovative on that and on this screening, because, we can have some basic screening with by whispering or by, I don't know how to do that. And we try to use new technologies for that. And we have a partner from Israel who developed an application to use just software who can be used by many by teachers or by community people. It's a very simple way, very simple, and we did a test to 2,000 with 2,500 children in the school environment in Phnom Penh. We did the first campaign, and we have to improve it, but we plan to do a second campaign in November in the suburb of Phnom Penh, and then we'll give the result to the Ministry of Education, and then we will see if they are interested by that and to use the application and to do a national screening.
Thank you very much. I know the answer to the question I'm going to ask, but why did you select hearing? I know vision, you've done vision screening, but why did you select hearing screening? Why did you focus on hearing?
Because we work on that.
I remember that a few years ago, there was a GPE-funded project that introduced disability screening and identified about 40% of children in some areas have untreated ear infections that, of course, resulted in partial hearing loss. So that was a really high prevalence of hearing, and there was a need to introduce hearing, not because there are so many children in Cambodia who cannot hear, it's just the untreated ear infection. And then when we actually shared these findings with other countries, we found that it's quite prevalent in other countries as well. So there is a need to have, what you're saying, some type of a technology to be able to assess hearing in a very quick way. So thank you very much for sharing this. We'll be moving on to South Africa and maybe talking about teaching and learning. And what was your experience in setting up support structures, so learning support, curriculum adaptation in South Africa? If you want to talk about the screening as well, that's fine.
Will do.
So I think I will describe what we refer to as our CS document, our CS policy, and it stands for our Screening, Identification and Assessment and Support Policy. It is a tool that has been developed over a number of years collaboratively with numerous people, professionals, parents, teachers. At the moment, there's about 30,000 teachers that have been trained in using this document. Initially, initially teachers feel that it's more extra work that they're going to have to put in, but once they're actually exposed to the tool, they realize that it's very easy to use and it's a streamlined process. So basically what it involves is that every single child that enters the school system should have the initial part of the CS completed. If any teacher notices anything of concern, they complete the Support Needs Assessment 1 section, which guides them in terms of how to support the children. They need to document any action that they've taken to support. They need to refer out for hearing screening or visual, whatever they feel is important. It's also, the parents is an integral part of this process throughout. If there is still concern after the teacher has put in the remedial action, they refer to the school-based support team, who then completes SNA 2, which basically puts together an individual support plan, a more detailed one for each learner. Also then refers maybe to speech therapy, OT, whatever is needed for the child. If there's still difficulty, the child is then referred to the district-based support team, who then complete the SNA 3, which includes the planning and budgeting for support for the learner, resource and support for the school as well as the learner, training and counseling for the educator as well as the parents. It also makes provision for monitoring the support for the learner, and it gives a lot of tools for that team then to support the learner. If that then is not successful, the learner is then referred and is given that LSEN number that I spoke to and is then placed in a more specialized system. It's a very structured, it's very, every little step is documented, and it really is an amazing tool that's in place in South Africa. When Hannah was going through her principles for this disability screening, I was quite chuffed that I could tick every single one. It's specific, it's low cost, it's easy to use. So that really is an excellent tool that's been rolled out in South Africa.
This is wonderful, because I know a lot of countries have requested either support or experiences from other countries. So maybe through our community of practice, we'll be able to share more about what this tool is and how to use it. And just have one question: what about assistive devices? Who is providing them?
That is a collaboration between Department of Education and Department of Health. It depends on what the assistive device is. Generally, things like wheelchairs, hearing aids will come from the Department of Health, but then the therapists in the school-based team will then assist with positioning, with the hearing aid battery. So it is a collaboration. The assistive technology and devices are also they're provided for in the CS document. So everything is documented there.
And then you mentioned the frequency. So all the children, when they start school, they do it. And how often is this screening done? Is it annual or?
It's an ongoing process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe just to add on the screening, and I can share the documentation, there is a very good app that has been developed by Professor De Wet Swanepoel in South Africa and being tested or used all over the world, called HearScreen, where they use a mobile technology and very simple for community workers to use, and that can quickly do the initial screening for hearing problems of children. And we are looking at this stage to collaborate, especially for younger children and with the Department of Health in that. But it is a fascinating, very low cost tool that can be used. I don't know whether you want to ask us also to comment on curriculum stuff or not, or is that your next question?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Sandy will share maybe some of the other, but I just want to share, and you know, this is the drum that I've beating the whole time around curriculum and inclusion. What we have done due to lessons learned in the past, when we developed the National Curriculum Framework for children birth to 4, is to include from day one children with disabilities. So the whole curriculum framework for birth to 4 is actually inclusive of young children with disabilities. And the beauty of that is when we started to develop training programs as a result of that curriculum for the young children and for their transition into school, it automatically just continue to include children with disabilities. We did not have to tell anybody, make sure that it's there, because the base document had it already. And I think some developments in terms of that is we developing an app currently, it's under development, called ECD Mobi, which is to facilitate or assist parents to understand play-based learning for young children from birth to 5 years old. And that also include children with disabilities in terms of the artwork, in terms of the activities, in terms of all of that, because the base document has already all of that in there, and also the training of the teachers for their classroom practice also included that. And I think that is for us a lesson, and also from the Department of Basic Education, for their future review of curriculum, especially the curriculum for grade R to 12, is to start to look at that as well, because at this stage it is separate. As Sandy can tell more about, there is not really strong curriculum commitment or outputs for children with disabilities that focus in an inclusive way on them.
Thank you very much. Cambodia.
Yeah, about curriculum, just to share with you the way we developed some curriculum for blind education and deaf education. We work closely with the Ministry of Education, with the Teacher Training Department, to develop this curriculum, but based on, I can say, the experience of 20 years from NGOs working in the field. So, in fact, with Crusade May, for example, we used to work on blind education and deaf education. Our staff started from scratch finally, because in 1991 it was not the priority of the government to send blind or deaf children to school, but we started from scratch, and then it's based on this experience with the best practices. Our staff develop the curriculum, and finally we use these documents, these practices, but because we don't have the academic knowledge, that's why we were supported by some experts in inclusive education and in curriculum development. So we work with for example, for the deaf curriculum, we work with NTID, the National Technical Institute for Deaf in Rochester, to support this development. So this is a kind of I don't know if we can call that inclusive, but just to develop some curriculum which are very practical.
Thank you. I think it's all very useful, especially as we establish a community of practice. It'll be interesting to segregate by the type of disability and what resources and adaptations are available, and what the apps and a lot of the new technology that is being used. For example, what you mentioned about the app for hearing test, I know that that's always been a challenge to be able to test for hearing problems in rural areas, and you need to have the portable audiometers, and they're not always available. The printouts get broken, and so it's great that now we're using technology. So I'd like to open up the floor for some questions. So if we'll take 3 questions at a time, and we will let the panel answer. So I will take Dr. Haga, Rosangela,
thank you,
Grace, at 4.
Okay. Thank you, and I want to thank the 2 teams for sharing their experiences with us. I'm just interested in the assessment, especially the Cambodian experience. Looks like it's a relatively recent undertaking, and I was just interested in knowing what kind of information that comes through during the screening, and in what format, and what that information is used for, or how it is used, because I've seen other systems that have been accused of labeling more than getting useful information that helps in learning. And I have another question related to the curriculum adaptations. And I've seen this, especially across certain countries in Africa, which are quite academically inclined, where the adaptations focus more on the testing or examinations. It's not as much about learning as it is about, well, exams. So I don't know what the experience in South Africa is. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosangela. And then we'll move on to this side of the.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. I have many questions. One thing I wanted to inform is that UNICEF, also for UNICEF colleagues here, we are in headquarters starting an initiative that for us is very good to see happening finally, that is working with the health section in UNICEF together with ECD, disability, and the communication for development sections, the 4 groups, teams working together. And it's on early identification, early assessment, and early interventions, including provision of AT and other things. We are doing this starting in 3 countries, Uganda, Bulgaria, and Peru, to develop a package that is focused on ECD, on the Care for Child Development package. This is specifically based in the health platform. And right now we are collecting, we have an academic group of advisors collecting all the types of screening and assessment tools that are available for health, but also for education, as this project is in the health platform with an ECD perspective that brings it from health to the community and to the beginning of the school cycle as well. So we are interested in everything related to screening and assessment, both in health and in education, especially those, not only, but especially those using technology. So if you can share with us, and I need this contact from Israel as well, if you can share with us what you have, it will be super useful. Right now we are in the moment of having this group collecting all of them and trying to classify. There are so many different screening tools in the world, and it would be great if we have like 2, 3 types of screening tools that would use the same methodology, that would consider even some of the methodologies we use today to collect data in general on disability, to use the same language of functioning instead of impairments. So all of this is what we are trying to do, to try to see what is there and how to make it coherent, giving less than 1 million options for people, right? Both in health and education. So we would be very, very glad if you can share with us everything that you know about.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add also that we're trying to collect some of the research ideas of where we have gaps in coverage. So the screening, we get a lot of requests, but we don't have the tool or something to refer to. So it's really nice to be able to generate some through this roundtable. So we have 2 questions from here, and then we'll go to the panel. So Kenya and Difit, please.
Thank you. So my question is about the sort of student assessment, but around learning. So I just wondered what your experiences have been around adaptations of learning assessments for children with different types and levels of difficulty or disability. So we've been looking at this in DFID Pakistan recently. There's a citizen-led learning assessment, the annual status of education report, which they're part of the PAL network as well. So basically citizen-led mainstream learning assessment that we've been using in some of our programs, as it's the only sort of nationally and provincially comparable learning assessment that we can use. But using that in some of our programs with children who who are deaf, proved to be a challenge because there weren't any assessment tools that were actually assessing proficiency in Pakistan Sign Language, and there wasn't a provision for how you would use those tools and administer them through sign language. So to both test sign language and to be used by interpreters through sign language. So we're now starting to fund a small project to try to adapt these mainstream, the administration of these mainstream tools so they can be used to assess the learning of deaf students. And I think part of the barrier that we've found has been around attitudes towards whether it's even possible to assess the learning of children with disabilities. We're trying to promote, yes, it is, the tools just need to be adapted or used in a different way. But often it's thought, oh, okay, well, we just can't include children with severe disabilities in mainstream learning assessments, so let's not bother. And then you stay with a sort of care approach to supporting children with disabilities rather than seeing their learning outcomes as important. So I was just wondering about your experiences around changes to learning assessments, and then also just linked to the screening process. We conduct screening or assessment of disability or impairment and then provide assistive devices, but there's always this gap around what do you do to support children with learning difficulties. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And last question, please.
Yeah, my name is Michael from Kenya. My question is, do you have a structured assessment team, and who constitutes that team? Because we'd like to hear your experiences, because like in Kenya, you find that you need a health professional, a nutritionist, an educationist, but there is no structure of that team such that when sometimes you need them, you find you are not getting the full team that is needed to assess these people, these children with disability. So how are they structured? Is it an officially structured team that actually is involved in assessment, or do you look for those professionals when you need now an assessment to be done? And then where is the assessment done? Do you have structured institutions that are actually assessing these learners before they go to school? And when they are in school, how is the assessment done, and which team? How are the teachers also maybe sensitized or trained on this area of assessment that they can also very quickly identify a case of disability arising before it is now too late? Thank you.
These are all very excellent questions, and we could probably spend a whole day discussing it, and we only have less than 10 minutes. So, but it shows that there's a lot of appetite for understanding or learning more about disability screening assessment, how it's set up, who is responsible, who provides assistive devices, how to do service mapping, how often is done, which ministries are involved, how NGOs are involved, how it's linked to learning. So very quickly, I know it's really not enough time to address the 4 questions that we got, but if somebody wants to have a go.
I can just quickly start.
Please.
Down there. I think on student assessment, and if we can elaborate or share the document, which is, and Sandy can add more around it, but I know there is a policy that government is using, the Department of Education, for concessions for children with disabilities during exam times, but that is still the very formal kind of assessment. And I just want to say one thing, and I think that is what we need to understand, whether we talk with children with disabilities or not, that all children can learn and all children do learn, whether they have a disability or not. So it's not an excuse not to provide learning and not to provide assessment and not to encourage children to lose or to learn, never mind their disability.
I think our CS document is very clear, and it's made up of the team that you were asking about. The structure, is there a structured assessment team? The school-based assessment team comprises of the parent, the educator, the school management team member. if there is any therapist based at that school, they'll also be part of that SBST. Once the referral happens to the district-based support team, the therapists that are based there and the psychologist, social worker, together with the parent, the educator, if the child is able and willing, they are also then part of that actual team. But it's set out very clearly. The document is downloadable from the Basic Education Department website. It's very, very clear. People, the teachers, like I said earlier, were quite intimidated initially until they received the training. In my opinion, you don't even need training. You just need to be able to read, because it's very clear and very easy to use. And it's ongoing. It's not just about exam. It's about learning throughout the day.
Thank you. Anybody from Cambodia?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to address to question 1 and question 4. Yeah, regarding to the use of information from the screening. So yeah, as we know that when we do the screening, I mean we already identify the difficulty or the problems with specific or particular children, right? That's why we do the screening. So when we do screening, in order to gather the data, right? To gather data, and then we give the supports, give the intervention, yeah, in terms of medical treatment, in terms of assistive devices, and also UDL, yeah, Universal Design for Learning as well, yeah. And after that, we still follow up, yeah, the progress or the changes in terms of learning, and also the disability or the difficulty of the particular children. And we also have IEP, yeah, individualized education plan to have individual children, yeah. And we try to make an assessment in terms of disability and also learning progress, yeah. And regarding to the structure of assessment team in Cambodia, we have the regulation, we have the guideline. So from the national to the school level, we have. So we just provide the training or orientation, yeah, regarding to the procedure of the assessment tool. So yeah, it will work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not saying that we are finishing this discussion. I'm just proposing we take it to the community of practice, and there'll be a proposal around how this will be structured. The community of practice, we'll discuss that later, because I know that not all the questions were answered, and then the process is quite complicated, and there are different models of providing screening and who is involved. And I think these are just 2 examples from Cambodia and South Africa. I know that some of the countries here have their own examples that they could share that they would be useful for all of us. So now we will be going into coffee break. So let's thank our panelists.